Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into the world of Samuel Pepys.
Ah, Pepys, a 17th century Londoner who kept this amazing diary, full of incredible details about his life.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is how much his everyday experiences from centuries ago still resonate with us today.
Right. He lived through some major historical moments like the reign of King Charles II and even the Great Plague.
But what makes his diary so interesting is that he didn't just focus on the big events. He
Exactly.
wrote about everyday stuff, too.
His job, his relationships, even his attempts at self-improvement, it makes him so relatable.
Let's talk about his work life. I think anyone who's ever had a job can relate to Pepys wanting a
Oh,
raise.
for sure. He was always trying to get a better salary, especially with all the responsibilities he had.
And he had to deal with some interesting personalities in the Navy office.
Oh, yeah. His colleagues, Sir William Penn and Sir William Batten, sound like a handful.
Pepys definitely didn't hold back on his opinions about them in his diary.
It's like reading a 17th century work vent session.
Totally. He even talks about how proud he felt when he learned about a former clerk of the Acts named Sir Peter Buck, who became super successful.
Like he was looking for validation in his own career.
Yeah, something I think a lot of us can understand.
Makes you realize that career ambitions and office dynamics haven't changed that much.
So we see Peace was ambitious, maybe even a little gossipy about his colleagues.
hmm
But what about his family life? Was he a family man?
Oh, very much so. He writes about his family all the time.
Both the good and the bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was really concerned about providing for his brother Tom.
And had a complicated relationship with his sister Paul.
He even tells this funny story about getting tricked by Sir William Batten over a stolen tankard. Sounds like a typical family gathering 17th century style.
Right. It's these little moments that make you realize family dynamics haven't really changed that much.
Nope. The desire to support your family, the arguments, the funny moments. It's all timeless.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
We often think people from the past as being so
I
different,
know.
but Pepys's worries about family, money, and even his attempts at self-improvement are so relatable.
He even documented all these attempts to better himself, just like people do today.
So what did he try?
Well, he tried to give up wine.
Oh, wow.
Cut back on going to the theater,
Rather.
tried to manage his money better. He even tried wearing a muff for the first time.
Uh-huh. It's like he was an early adopter of the self-help movement,
Seriously, imagine him writing blog posts about getting his life together.
and maybe even hitting the gym if they had those back then.
Oh, I can definitely picture Peeps on social media.
Totally. Imagine him documenting his daily life on Twitter.
Okay, but speaking of juicy details, Peace didn't just write about his own life.
What else did he write about?
He was also a keen observer of all the scandals and gossip happening at the royal court,
Oh, there was no shortage of drama back then.
especially with King Charles II and his infamous mistress, Lady Castlemaine.
Lady Castlemaine. Tell me more about her.
Well, Pepys talks about her lavish clothing, how she was always by the king's side, all the rumors swirling around her. It's like reading a historical gossip column.
And it wasn't just harmless gossip.
Right, it had real political implications. The king's favoritism toward Lady Castlemaine caused a lot of tension, especially with the queen arriving and all the whispers about the Duke of Monmouth.
It seems like even centuries ago, people were obsessed with stories of power, intrigue, and forbidden romance.
It's timeless.
But Pepys's diary isn't all witty observations and court drama.
No, definitely not.
He lived through some really tough times too, including the Great Plague of London.
And his descriptions of it are chilling, but strangely familiar too.
What do you mean?
He talks about the growing fear in the city, the deserted streets, businesses closing, and the constant sound of the death knell. It's a powerful portrait of a city under siege.
I can't even imagine living through something like that, the constant threat of death hanging over you.
And yet what's striking is how much his observations resonate with our own experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic.
In what way?
The anxiety, the social distancing, the impact on daily life.
Yeah. It's all eerily similar.
It's a reminder that even in vastly different circumstances, human responses to crisis can be so alike.
It makes you wonder. If Pepys were alive today, what would he be writing about? Would he be documenting his lockdown experiences? Trying to bake sourdough bread? Maybe even complaining about Zoom meetings?
It's funny to think about, right?
Okay, so we've got Pepys the ambitious worker, the devoted family man, the self-improvement enthusiast, the gossip columnist, and the plague survivor. But there's another side to him we can't ignore.
What's that?
Pepys, the quirky observer. The man who found humor in the everyday and wasn't afraid to be himself.
Oh, absolutely. Pepys had a sharp wit and wasn't afraid to show his eccentricities.
Like his detailed descriptions of every meal he ate.
Like the original food blogger.
Right. You can practically taste the food he describes. And then there's that time he experimented with Macassar poison on a dog.
Wait, what? Tell me more about this poison experiment.
Well, apparently he was curious about this substance called Macassar poison and decided to test it out on a dog.
Oh no, what happened?
Luckily, the dog seems to have been fine. It just shows Pepys's endless curiosity.
That's for sure. And wasn't there something about a poem he was obsessed with? Hudibras, I think it was called.
Oh, yeah. He loved it at first, but then he ended up selling it because he thought it was silly.
Even Pepys had his evolving tastes. And remember that story about the washiel and bowl woman and girl he heard singing in Moorfields?
These little anecdotes give us such a fascinating glimpse into life in 17th century London.
From social customs to entertainment, even the slang they used. It's all there in Pepys's diary.
It's like a time capsule that brings history to life in a way textbooks just can't.
Exactly. And that's the magic of Pepys's diary. It's not just a historical document. It's a window into the mind of a real person, with all his complexities, contradictions, and flaws.
So we've covered a lot. Work struggles, family drama, scandalous gossip, plagues, and quirky humor.
It's been quite the journey.
But one thing is clear. Samuel Pepys, despite living centuries ago, offers a surprisingly relevant and engaging look at human nature.
It's almost like he's a friend from another time sharing his life with us, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
And that's what makes his diary so compelling. It reminds us that the past was filled with real people who had their own anxieties, ambitions, and weaknesses, just like us.
And by learning about their experiences, we gain a better understanding of ourselves and our place in history.
So what does this all mean for us here in the 21st century? What can we learn from Samuel Pepys and his extraordinary diary? We'll dive deeper into those questions in just a moment. So stick with us as we continue exploring the world of Samuel Pepys.
You know, it's remarkable how Pepys's diary can make us feel so connected to someone who lived centuries ago.
Yeah, it really is.
It's like by reading about his experiences, we realize some things are just timeless.
It's true, like looking into a mirror across the centuries, seeing our own hopes and anxieties reflected in his life.
Exactly. Those work struggles he had, wanting a better salary, dealing with office politics. It's something a lot of us deal with today.
It definitely makes you realize that the workplace hasn't really changed all that much.
Not really, no. And those entries about his family, wanting to provide for his brother, figuring out his relationship with his sister.
Super relatable.
Right, just reinforces the idea that family relationships, with all their ups and downs, are kind of a universal thing.
A common thread that connects us through time.
Absolutely. But while we're focusing on those relatable parts, it's also important to remember that Pepys's world was very different from ours in many ways.
Oh, for sure. Like what? What stands out to you?
Well, for one, think about the role of women back then.
Okay.
Pepys's diary really shows the societal norms of his time. Women's lives were mostly confined to the home.
Right.
He talks about his wife's activities, like her sewing, her visits with friends. It paints a picture of a world where women's roles were very clearly defined. Quite different from today.
It's a good reminder that while there are these timeless echoes in the diary, we also need to remember the historical context.
Exactly. What might have been normal then isn't necessarily something we'd consider acceptable now.
We've come a long way in terms of social norms.
Right. So it's crucial to approach historical texts with a critical but understanding perspective. See the value of the insights they offer while also recognizing how things have changed.
And speaking of historical context, Pepys' diary gives us a front row seat to some pretty major events.
Oh, yeah, definitely. He lived through the restoration of the monarchy, the Great Fire of London.
Talk about a wild time to be alive.
Seriously, it's like a crash course in 17th century English history.
And he didn't just write about these events from a distance.
No, not at all. He shares his personal reactions, his fears, his hopes. It makes history feel so much more real.
Like with the Great Plague. His accounts of that are just terrifying, but also moving.
He describes the fear in the city, the empty streets, the constant threat of death. But he also talks about the resilience of people, the acts of kindness, the determination to carry on.
You can really feel the weight of that experience in his words.
And it's amazing how his observations, written over 350 years ago, connect to our own experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic.
You're right. The social distancing, the quarantines, that feeling of uncertainty and fear.
It's all there.
It shows how, even in different circumstances, humans react to crises in similar ways.
Definitely. Pepys's diary, with its blend of personal stories and historical events, helps us connect with the past on a deeper level.
It's like he's showing us that we're not that different for those who came before us. We share the same anxieties, the same hopes, and that desire to understand the world.
Absolutely. And that's why studying history is so valuable. It helps us see ourselves as part of a larger story, to understand the forces that shaped our world, and maybe learn from the past.
And speaking of learning from the past, Pepys's diary also gives us insight into the political scene of his time.
Oh, yeah. He saw firsthand the restoration of the monarchy, the tensions between the crown and parliament, the power struggles.
Sounds like a real-life political drama.
And Pepys, with his attention to detail and knack for understanding people, was right in the middle of it, attending meetings, observing the major players.
So did he ever share his own opinions about those political figures?
Oh, absolutely. He was very candid in his diary. He didn't hold back on his assessments of those personalities and power struggles.
That's what makes his account so interesting. It's not just a dry historical record.
Right. It's a personal take on history from someone who was both involved in the events and watching them unfold.
I bet he had some juicy stories.
Oh, I'm sure. And through his observations, we get a better understanding of how complex English politics were back then. The challenges of governing and the constant themes of ambition and power.
It makes you realize that politics, like human nature, has these recurring patterns. The players and issues change, but the dynamics of power and ambition stay pretty consistent.
Exactly. And by looking at the past, we can better understand our present. We see how history repeats itself, how decisions made centuries ago still affect us today, and maybe even find ways to handle our own challenges.
It's like that saying, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Yeah. By exploring Pepys's diary, we're not just enjoying stories from another time.
Right.
We're having a conversation with history, looking for wisdom and perspective that can help us in our own lives.
It's about connecting the dots between then and now.
Exactly. And that's the power of primary sources like Pepys's diary. They allow us to connect with history on a personal level, to see it as lived experiences, not just events in a textbook.
So we've talked about Pepys's relatable life, the historical context, the political scene, even the humor and quirks that make his diary so enjoyable.
It's been quite a journey.
But through it all, there's this big theme that emerges.
What's that?
The power of observation. Pepys was amazing at noticing little details, everyday things, how people behaved.
He was so curious about the world around him, and he wrote it all down so carefully.
And by doing that, he created a work that still fascinates us centuries later.
His diary is a reminder to pay attention, to notice things, to find meaning in the everyday.
It makes you wonder, what would Pepys think of our world today? All the technology, social media, how fast things change.
He'd be fascinated, wouldn't he?
I think so. He was always open to new experiences. Maybe he'd be a blogger or an influencer, sharing his thoughts online.
Imagine Pepys' Instagram feed. Food pics, theater reviews, maybe even some political commentary.
It's fun to imagine him navigating our modern world.
Definitely. And it highlights an important point from our discussion.
What's that?
History isn't just something in the past. It's alive, and it shapes who we are today and who we'll become.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to engage with it, learn from it, find our place in it.
So true. So as we wrap up this episode, I'd like to leave our listeners with a thought. What insights have you gained from Pepys' story? And how can those insights help you in your own life and how you see the world?
It's a good question to think about, because ultimately learning about history isn't just about gaining knowledge.
Right.
It's about using that knowledge to make our own lives better.
Well said. So as we say goodbye to Samuel Pepys for now, let his story inspire you.
To be curious, to be resilient, and to find meaning in the everyday, just like he did.
You know, it's amazing how a diary written over 350 years ago can still feel so relevant today.
Right. It really speaks to how universal the human experience is.
Those themes of love, loss, ambition, and just the everyday struggles and joys of life.
Yeah.
They really resonate across time.
Yeah, Pepys saw history unfold, but he also captured the human heart.
And that's what makes his diary so fascinating. It's not just about events, it's about what it means to be human.
To grapple with big questions and find meaning in everyday moments.
Exactly. He gives us a look into the past, but he also shows us ourselves.
And in that reflection, I think we find comfort and inspiration.
Comfort in knowing we're not alone in our experiences. and inspiration to live our life with more curiosity, a little humor, and lots of heart.
That's a great way to put it. Pepys shows us that history isn't just dates and battles.
It's about people.
Yeah, people just like us, living their lives, facing challenges, and leaving behind their stories.
And those stories, whether they're diaries, letters, or even social media posts today, offer a connection to the past.
It's a way to learn from those who came before us, to understand that the human experience continues, and to find our own place in the story of history.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Samuel Pepys, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. If Pepys were around today, what do you think he'd be writing about? What would his social media look like?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Would he be a big Twitter guy, sharing his thoughts on everything?
Or a food blogger, describing every detail of his meals like he did back then?
Or maybe even a TikTok star, capturing the funny and strange things about life in the 21st century?
It's fun to imagine, isn't it? This guy from another time trying to figure out our world today.
It really highlights something important we've talked about today.
What's that?
History isn't just stuck in the past.
Right.
It's a living thing, shaping our present and our future. And it's up to us to engage with it, learn from it, and find our place in it.
So true. Well, as we say goodbye to Samuel Pepys for now, let his story inspire you.
Approach life with a sense of wonder. Find connections to the past. And embrace all the richness and complexity of being human.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Samuel Pepys. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.